All right. Folks, the Trump agenda is not inflationary. That's the subject of the rift tonight. The New York Times, in a long piece, has now officially decided that the real inflation is Donald Trump and his policies. Of course, there's virtually no numbers in the piece, so let's review the bidding just for a moment. Over Trump's four-year term, the level of consumer prices rose by a scant 7.7% for his entire term, which comes to 1.9% annually. Meanwhile, during Joe Biden's nearly completed term, so far, the level of consumer prices rose 20%, or 6.1% annually. President Trump is pledging to essentially reprise his successful first-term economic policies of drill, baby, drill, tax cuts, deregulation, and punishing unfair trade practices. So, ask yourself, if those same policies didn't generate high inflation in the first term, why would the same policies generate high inflation in the second term? Of course, the New York Times takes the Biden view. Inflation was transitory and it was caused by COVID and Vladimir Putin. So how about this thought? Mr. Biden is running $2 trillion budget deficits as far as the eye can see, with near record peacetime spending as a share of GDP. All this with a relatively low 4% unemployment rate and a still stubbornly high inflation rate. Now, even John Maynard Keynes would roll over in his grave at massive deficit spending with high inflation and low unemployment. Whoops, Times forgets to mention that. The article does mention that the U.S. is producing oil at roughly 13 million barrels a day, but that's where we were under Trump 5 years ago. And we should be running at 15 or 16 million barrels a day, but for the fact that Biden has put the clamps on federal drilling and exploration in Alaska, New Mexico, and offshore. We were energy dominant today. Instead of relying on our enemies like Russia and Iran, then oil prices would be closer to $40 than 80. And the oil costs impact hundreds of everyday consumer goods and healthcare services, which would have a profoundly disinflationary impact on the entire economy, would bring down interest rates and personal borrowing costs along the way. The Times does concede that Trump deregulation lowers business costs. Good for them, I suppose. But their biggest mistake was on the Trump tax cuts. The fact remains, lower marginal tax rates on individuals and businesses increase the production of goods, raise real wages, and enhance productivity output per hour. Now, those are all counter-inflationary effects. When marginal tax rates were slashed under JFK and Reagan and Trump, inflation never uttered a serious peep. And not all tax cuts are the same. The Times misses this. Temporary tax credits to spur one-time consumption spending would be inflationary because there's no supply effects from business. But permanently lower tax rates create incentives to produce and invest. And that can actually lower inflation in many, many cases. Then the Times suggests that Biden's open border catastrophe, hang on, is really a good thing because it lowers wages. Well, if there's even a scintilla of truth to the wage reduction, that's one heck of a price to pay for blowing up sovereign boundaries with criminality alongside sex and drug trafficking. You know, employment data suggests that foreign-born jobs have skyrocketed, while native-born jobs have plunged under Biden. But with a very low employment-to-population ratio, closed borders would enhance native-born jobs. That assumes government benefits don't interfere with work effort. And then on the question of tariffs, well, the Times continues the myth that tariffs always cause higher inflation, even though the evidence shows that inflation did not rise during the Trump tariff increases on China's unfair trading practices. Look, consumers can boycott tariff goods and services if the price is too high. Or China had to slash the prices of its own tariff goods. So the marketplace provides offsets. And don't forget, Trump had tariff reductions or tariff barrier reductions with places like South Korea, Australia, and Japan. That actually lowered costs. Now, we should have learned that some of the old line economists are too hidebound to understand that solving unfair trading practices is an issue by itself. It's not related to inflation. The principal cause of inflation, too much money chasing too few goods, Joe Biden's massive spending, and the Fed's enabling of that spending is the real inflationary problem, even while regulatory and tax threats have smothered business production. Trump is suggesting his successful economic policies can be repeated if he is reelected. And you know what? There's no empirical reasons to doubt him. All right? And that is my riff.